Good afternoon, everybody. Today I wanted to talk about a framing device that I've begun to use. Started using it a couple of years ago, and I began to use it as part of my lesson planning for the week so I could make sure that I was hitting everything that I was supposed to hit for the week. But over the years, I've actually allowed that to flow into the agenda setting. So this went from something the kids didn't see to something that I actually provide for them. So I want to talk a little bit today and see if this is helpful to you at all when you make your lesson plan. So I wanted to talk today about the big questions framing device and how I use that to actually kind of organize the information that I get to the kids and how they can use that to take their notes. And it kind of works along with Cornell Notes a little bit and is helpful for them at the end of the class, understanding exactly where all that information that we're providing them fits into the grand scheme of things and how all of that information is going to be useful to them. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, watch along. I'm going to kind of show you a little bit about how I do it. Certainly yours may look a little bit different from mine, but I think it's something useful and something that I like to do. So the way the big questions framing device works is essentially what you're trying to do is boil down all of the information that you want the kids to have at the end of the lesson and provide them with that information at the very beginning. So you're basically telling them what you're going to tell them so that they understand where that information fits into the bigger scheme of the day's lesson, and probably more importantly, where it fits to within the broader themes of the unit that you're going to do. So for the purpose of this, I'm going to walk through just an example lesson that I have, which is the government lesson that I did on political parties. This was set up to be a 48-minute lesson, but certainly the exact same, all the same rules would apply to a longer lesson as well. You just have a little bit more time for practice and things like that. So the framing device is basically big questions. And the idea behind that is you essentially tell the kids what questions they're supposed to be able to answer at the end of the class period. So for my lesson on political parties, which is a short 48-minute lesson, I basically told them they need to know three things at the end of the day before they leave the room. So question number one for this lesson was, why do we have political parties? Question number two is, why are there two major political parties? And question number three is, why don't we have more than two political parties? Telling the kids ahead of time where the lesson is headed so they understand exactly all the information that they're supposed to get before it's actually delivered, I think helps them to organize their notes a little bit more and helps them to figure out what's important from the earlier parts of the lesson when they don't necessarily have the whole picture in front of them. From this particular point, once I've told them what all of the information is that we're going to go over during the lesson, I'm then allowed to kind of go back through and hit on each of those particular topics by itself, kind of going through the same basic format for each of those topics to create the whole of the lesson. So step one in the process is to basically hit on the first question. So the question is, why do we have political parties? Step one would be to deliver the actual content the kids need to have at the end of the lesson. So in this particular example, if I was talking about why we have political parties, there's basically two things that I need to hit on. We need to talk about the major party functions, basically the reasons why a candidate running as part of a party has advantages over a candidate running by themselves. And I would also tie that back to something that we covered earlier in the class, which is Federalist number 10, where James Madison talks about factions. And he warned in Federalist number 10 about the mischief of factions, and we need to talk about why immediately after the resignation of George Washington, the entire system of people who said they didn't want factions basically created parties almost overnight. After the actual content that's going to be tested has been delivered, I then like to go over stories and examples of this particular concept in action that's going to help to kind of cement the kids' information in their heads and to make sure that they're able to remember something. So a lot of times the kids may not remember what the major party functions are, but if you tell them a story that relates to one of the major party functions, they're going to be able to recall that and probably figure it out on the test. So for example, if we were talking about the party's fundraising function, you might talk about how it takes somewhere along the order of $700 million to run for president, and not that many independent candidates are able to come up with that kind of money. Or you can tell them a funny story about candidates who attempted to run on their own and basically got annihilated by the major parties and the major fundraising of those parties. So once I've gone over the stories and examples with the kids, this doesn't take very long, maybe 4 or 5 minutes. I then like to follow up with providing the kids some context for this particular topic, and then very importantly, I need to create impact on their lives. So the kids generally don't remember things that are just kind of like esoteric knowledge floating out there. But if you can connect what we're teaching to their daily life in a way that's tangible, something that they can actually say, oh, yeah, look, this is the impact of political parties on my life, then certainly you can have a higher chance of getting them to remember this information. So if we're talking about, the major party functions and how those impact their lives, you might talk about the nominations function and the attempted nomination of Bernie Sanders. That's something that they care about. Or you could talk about, any number of the other party functions, the brokerage function. So even if you do get elected to Congress, you're not going to be able to accomplish anything unless you're a member of a party, because you won't get good committee assignments, or you won't get the influence that you might have as a member of one of the major parties. So choose something that you think your particular kids care about, be it Bernie Sanders or a particular piece of legislation, and explain to them why, outside of the party system, it's very unlikely that this particular thing will actually get done. Last but not least, after we've provided context and impact for the students, we wrap up this particular section with the checking for understanding. So this is something as simple as, just tossing a question or two out to the class, kind of taking the temperature of the room. It could be something you do at the end of the class with an exit ticket. So you might have a checking for understanding for all of the different questions at the very end. There's a couple of different ways to go about accomplishing this, but it's important that you know that you can get the kids to tell you back the information that they're supposed to know before you can move on the next day. Or if it's something that you have to go back and reteach, then certainly that's not a big deal. And essentially, this process repeats itself in my lesson plans for each of the big questions for the day. So we did political parties here, and we're talking about why do we have political parties, but I repeat this exact same process for question number 2. So why are there only 2 major parties? What are the 2 major parties? What do they do? And so we can repeat steps 1 through 4 for each of those. It doesn't actually take as long as it probably looks like. And kind of a repetition of this process of delivering material, giving the kids a story and an example, telling them why it's relevant to them and telling them why it has impact on their lives, and then checking to make sure that they process the information, I have found over time goes a long way to making sure and to helping me to understand that the kids are getting the information that they're supposed to at the end of the class. So hopefully this is helpful to you. I like to plan out this stuff ahead of time, so I'll come up with a couple of examples for any given thing, and I'll have that stuff ready so that at the we can just do it. It seems like it's off the cuff to the kids, but it's something that's a little bit pre-planned. So hopefully this is helpful. If you want to try this when planning your lessons, I would highly recommend it. This is something that works well for me. It helps the kids understand what they're supposed to know, kind of puts it into context of the larger lesson, and it helps me to make sure that I'm not forgetting information. I know, especially if I'm doing it off the top of my head, I'll always forget to tell one class something, and then I have to go the rest of the day and track them down. So providing those big framing devices is helpful for you, and it's also helpful for the kids. So hopefully this is something that is helpful for you, but that's what I've got for you. Thank you very much.